my pleasure to do something for Iactp. I know our oncoming president is on there, Mr. Jim Wiseman from Missouri. Jim and I have known each other for many years. He's going to make an excellent president. He's definitely suave, debonair, and tragically cool and incredibly hip. So he's going to do an excellent job. This particular class, I'm really passionate about, and I know that many of you may have heard this phrase that we teach what we most need to learn ourselves. And I'm an avid believer in if you really want to learn something at a different level, you research it and teach it. They call it third person teaching. That I learned from Stephen R. Covey, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But I do want to say that this is something I've become very passionate about in regards to how our mind works and how many factors are involved to influence us toward motivation, success, based on how you define success. A lot of the information that you're getting, and I want to emphasize this to each of you who are listening today. I want to give you my email, and that way I can actually email to you the slides plus additional information. And some of that additional information is where the research came from, which I don't list it. I may make mention of it, but it's not listed on the slides. But I'd be more than happy to send the slides to you, as well as the reference material that I've used. One in particular that I've used is from the Neuro-Leadership Institute. I had the opportunity to go to New York City, and I became aware of how our brain, even though I suspected that these things occurred, I didn't really understand why. But I'll start by saying this: our brains are pretty lazy. And I'll explain what I mean here in a minute, but we have a tendency to get in the comfort zone. And of course, that's what this title is living beyond the comfort zone. And I know that we're very guilty of this, in particular in the training arena. If you're as a correctional trainer or correctional administrator of training, that and I'm going to use some words here that you may not have heard before, but I call it intellectual incest. Now, sounds kind of perverted, but we have a tendency to stay with what we're comfortable with. Things that we know, no matter how much they may be detrimental, we have a tendency to stay in that arena because, we talk the same language. So we love going to Iactp conferences because we have so much in common with those that we associate with at those conferences. So it's a blast, but it's more of, now granted, the resources are great, but you're really in your comfort zone. Getting out of the comfort zone is where you're really going to stretch. So without further ado, jump right into it. I'm going to go over the purpose of the class, and so then there's 3 of them: the purpose, process, and the payoff. But the purpose of this short presentation is to share with you the latest leading-edge neuroscience-based evidence on how to effectively reprogram your brain and inspire you to leave the comfort zone in order to aid you to reach your full potential. And I know it sounds kind of grandiose, but it's actually simple yet profound, and it can be complicated because of our habits. So the process that we're going to take you through is I'm going to share some highlights because this is very intrinsic and it can be really deep. I want to try to make it as simple as possible. but the latest discoveries in personal achievement that may require a paradigm shift in your habitual thinking that may be sabotaging your success. Because all of us are guilty of inaccurate thinking from time to time. And the awareness of when these times are occurring is really the first step towards the success that you deserve. So the first step is the awareness of being aware that, yes, I'm not thinking correctly. And I kind of associated it with, you probably have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step is, admitting that there's an issue there. So, but knowing that you're not thinking correctly is really the first step. The payoff, of course, is after completing the course, you're going to have the tools and be motivated to make simple but dynamic changes, which will not only significantly enhance your life, but will impact those closest to you and those within your work environment. So everybody wins if you apply these principles, not just you yourself. But a little caveat there. I want to emphasize that you in particular be self-absorbed. So I hope you're in a location to where you're not being interrupted, and like I am right now with showing the battery on my laptop going dead. So second, and I'll get that fixed. Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question. Those who are on there right now, how many of you actually made a conscious decision to be sick and miserable? Have a failing career or business? Be broke and poor? Now, there is a difference between, there's a lot of people that actually become broke. A lot of wealthy people become broke, but they're never poor. Or have horrible relationships. Now, I think that we can safely say that that is the opposite of actually what we want. But oftentimes we perform in a way and act in a way that sabotages the success. And these are the areas that it looks like we've decided to do these things. And I remember in a particular conference that I was teaching this, an individual raised his hand that that's what he wanted. He wanted to be have horrible relationships. And I looked at him and I said, his name was Charlie. And I said, Charlie, I said, are you kidding me? Do you understand the question? He goes, oh yeah. And it just so happens his wife was right beside him. And she said, yes, he does. He wants to be miserable, horrible, sick, poor. She just named them off. It was hilarious. The whole audience cracked up. But so I don't think you'd probably fall into that category. And he may just be, you're just trying to be funny. I'm not sure. So all of us, we want to be healthy and happy. We want to do well in our careers or our business, and we want to be reasonably prosperous. And I know some of you may want to be unreasonably prosperous, and that's okay too. And we want to have loving and quality relationships. So these are the fundamental requirements to achieve our greatest goal and desire. Is the bottom line, it's peace of mind. So if we have these working in congruency, that all the areas above, that will give us the ultimate goal of peace of mind. We also know the why behind it is because a lot of research has went into this, that people who are typically happy, they live longer, they've got longevity, they're more productive and prosperous in their careers or business. In fact, I heard a gentleman by the name of Dan Kennedy had talked about a multi-million-dollar company that was consistently increasing the revenue, and he spent at least $250,000 a year on having things to make employees comfortable and happy. He hired a masseuse. He had a full gym. They had a place to cook up their meals if they wanted. He would bring in comedians to keep them engaged in laughter. And if people are happy at work, I mean, common sense tells, if you're happy at what you're doing and you're happy with the relationships you have, you're going to be very productive. And it, just like negativity, it's going to spread just like happiness will spread. So we all want these things above. We want to be healthy, happy, reasonably prosperous, and have good health. But the bottom one here that I list, it's all about your feelings, how you feel. We're not creatures of logic and reasoning. We're really creatures of emotion. And that emotion comes obviously through thoughts that we're thinking, which leads to other things. And I'll get into that in a moment. Now, as you see this illustration, and some of you, if you're on here and you saw the presentation that I did at the last Iactp conference, I used this as an illustration, and some of the other things you're going to find familiar, but I did add more to talk about the brain specifically. So we see the frog, and that's a picture that I actually put on there, and then I found a pot of boiling water underneath. So we see if you put a frog, drop it in that hot water, it'll immediately jump out. But if you put that frog in the same pot of water at room temperature, then that frog, if you turn it up to, whatever the temperature, 211 degrees, 212, I think is boiling, you put it to boiling, that frog will lie there in the water and literally boil to death. So the emphasis is that it gets acclimated to the changing environment and is really unaware of it cognitively. But we often do the same things. When some of you that have some gray on your head or in your 50s, you can look back at 20, 30 years, and we have drastically changed as a culture in many areas. And I love what the National Institute did on multi-generational workforce of showing how things have changed. There's a lot of generations out there that have different values based on the environment and based on major events that have happened. But some of the things that have happened is slow and gradual that we don't pay attention to it until it's too late. But in the 1950s, now some of you may not have heard of this research, but it was by the Hoover Institute. But according to the Hoover Institute, there are currently 77,000 clinical psychologists, 192 clinical social workers, 105,000 mental health counselors, 50,000 marriage and family therapists, 17,000 nurse psychotherapists, 30,000 life coaches. So the emphasis is, and I didn't mean to skip to the next one, but years ago in the 1950s, it was going to one of those was simply unheard of. Very few people ever went to clinics about their social, now we have the antidepressants that have, people are eating like candy. The advertisements of drugs that are on television now, and I think the United States is the leading country that advertises medication. In some countries, you never see medication advertised on television. But most of you that actually watch those commercials after you listen to the side effects, you're like, huh, I'd rather have, the side effects alone sound worse than what the cure to the actual disease is. But one of the false teachings that was taught, and most of you remember this, is that the sun rotates around the earth. They used to think that the sun, it wasn't the other way around, with the earth went around the sun. But Galileo actually proved this theory, and then Copernicus, he actually expanded on the Copernican theory. But when Copernicus was lying on his deathbed, he revealed this because he knew of what ridicule and how humiliated and possibly tortured to retract his idea. The same with Galileo. When Galileo, with the telescope, and he proved that the sun was the center of the universe, he was threatened. He was placed under house arrest, and then he was eventually kicked out of Italy for changing that paradigm or a way of thinking by proving the actual reality. Even as late as the 1950s, this gentleman here, he broke the 4-minute mile. His name was Bannister, his last name. I think it was Roger Bannister or Charles Bannister. I can't remember. But he broke the 4-minute mile. They thought before that it was humanly impossible to break the 4-minute mile. But the interesting thing is that after he broke the 4-minute mile running, within 2 years, 5 more people broke the 4-minute mile. So it's not uncommon now to break a 4-minute mile. So it was a breakthrough of a traditional way of thinking. Now, this is a cute story, and some of you may have heard it, but it really tells all when it comes to how we think and how we perceive things. That this man, when he got married, he noticed that his wife always cooked a pot roast, and when she did, she would cut the ends off the pot roast. And he couldn't understand why. He said, "Why do you do that?" She says, "Well, that's what my mom always used to do." And he wasn't satisfied with that answer, so he went to his mother-in-law and he says, "Mom," he says, "why do you cut the ends off your pot roast?" And to his surprise, my mom always used to do it. So finally he goes to the grandmother and asks her, and says, "Why do you cut the ends off the pot roast?" And she said, "Well, because it won't fit in the pan." So generation after generation, people do things and they don't even understand why they do it. They can't give you a reason. It's just a learned behavior that they learned as infants all the way up. Now, this is one of my heroes, Zig Ziglar. He was Mr. Motivation, but he had a book called "See You at the Top." His audio presentation of it as well. But what is the top for you? Of course, it's different for everyone. But I want to talk about these 4 things here, and that's education, real intelligence, what your potential is, and then success. So we're just going to breeze through these, but I want to make some significant points about it. So education. Now think about this, folks. We've been taught what to think, but not how to think. Think about your school days, the things that you had to take in school. Now, I want to make a point here and emphasize this. When I taught this to some probation officers, one of the critiques was that I bashed the education system. Well, sometimes it needs a little bashing. However, I'm not knocking someone who gets a PhD or achieves their MBA. Granted, you're going to get valuable information from an education. So please don't misunderstand me, but I do want to just bring out some actual facts when it comes to education versus what intelligence, how it's really measured in respect to success. So here's a myth. Knowledge is power. You've probably heard that expression over and over. Knowledge is power. It's probably one of the biggest lies that has ever been taught to us, because The truth is, it's only potential power. The performance gap in life is between not what we know and what we do. Knowledge is only potential power. This gentleman right here, in fact, if you see his picture, his name's Paul Martinelli. He is president of the John Maxwell team. And I got on the John Maxwell team back in 2016. And it was, I can't even describe the feeling that I got of being with John Maxwell. So I didn't know who Paul Martinelli was, but John Maxwell made him the president of the team. And as you can see, the arrow pointing down to his head, and it has me there in the center with the thumbs up. Paul Martinelli, he's a multimillionaire, and he's from Pennsylvania. He actually was a high school dropout. He started a cleaning business in Pittsburgh all by himself, and he finally hired a couple of guys to help him. And his challenge was in school, he stuttered really bad. Now, his brother went on to be very successful. He's a professor at WVU. He's got a sister who's a nurse practitioner. So everyone in his family became very successful, but the fact that he stuttered, of course, he got picked on as a child. And everybody knows the story, how, someone goes from rags to riches or has some type of physical or mental handicap and it become very famous. But in his case, he was so beat up as far as his self-image and his self-concept that, he kept hearing the phrase from other kids, dummy, and so he was picked on in school. But now, of course, he's the president of the John Maxwell team. And you can still pick up, sometimes he'll hesitate when he's talking, but he got rid of the stuttering. But he said what really changed his life, he was being pretty successful in his cleaning business. He hadn't reached the utopia yet, or he hadn't gotten wealthy. But what was the major change for Paul was a man introduced him to a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Now, that book has been in the top, I think it's the top 15 biggest selling books of all time. An excellent book, and I highly recommend it for all of you because it's based on the research done by Napoleon Hill back in the early 1900s, where he interviewed Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and he was hired by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Carnegie. And so you obviously know that name, the big steel magnate of that era. But I want to emphasize a couple of things as we go along. But the Think and Grow Rich book really turned Paul Martinelli's life around. And I read the book, I think it was in the early or late 1980s is the first time that I read it. And the 12 principles that are pointed out in that book are phenomenal. So from thinking and growing rich, not necessarily in financial terms, but it was just an overall, and the reason that he wrote it, because Andrew Carnegie wanted people to know that, because we're in a depression, it does not mean that we're not going to be survivors and bounce back. So he wanted people to start thinking differently instead of the woe is me. Myth number 2, if you don't have a healthy 3-digit IQ, you won't be equipped for a successful life. Now, if any of you are like the academic Dillard, like my, I really thought that I was going to be challenged in life. I didn't have a real healthy, like my sister, like a 135, but I had, a little above average IQ. But there was so much emphasis on that. And here's the thing, folks, when you are told by people of influence, people that you look up to, or an educator or a teacher, and they place you in a category because you might have an IQ of only, 99%, or just for an example. then what suffers, of course, is your self-image. So you'll look at yourself, and it takes a lot to recover from that unless you're instructed differently and someone can enlighten you that no, there's other forms of intelligence besides IQ, and we'll discuss a couple of those. First of all, we've got IQ. Now, this is based on the research that's been conducted. IQ only equates, when we look at overall success in life, it equates for about 6%. Now, EQ, the emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, is fully 45% of people's success. So there's also physical intelligence, spiritual intelligence. So we can see the physical intelligence in some of our athletes. People who have spiritual intelligence that are very good at discerning and very good at communication. But emotional intelligence tops the chart. So let's look at that for just a moment. So if we look at IQ, we know that it's only going to measure your intellectual ability, analytical, logical, and your rational ability. But when we look at emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, how well you know yourself, self-expression, self-direction, self-esteem, your ability to express yourself without the need for others to assist or affirm you. You're independent of the opinion of others and how well you like yourself. That is crucial, folks, of how well you like yourself. Your self-esteem is crucial in life. And when it comes to goal setting, anything, you've got to have that high self-esteem. People skills, how well you communicate and interact with others, and diversity. Decision-making ability, your ability to make quality decisions quickly, but without being impulsive. Now, Jim knows me pretty well, and he can tell you that, Randy, you need some work in that impulsivity. He can tell, he's probably got a big grin on his face right now. And your ability to handle stress, probably another area. And I'm learning, folks, I really am, the importance of mental relaxation, to be able to relax during the day, to take what Harry Truman called your mental foxhole. And there's a whole different class that I have on that, but like I said, we often teach what we most need to learn. Another myth. If I'm the expert at the widget production, just using that as an example, then I'm going to do great as a boss. Well, we know that's not true. And in fact, a guy by the name of Peters, called the Peter Principle, Dr. Peters came up with it. The fact is, you may be the best widget in production, the technician, but being a leader or a manager supervisor is a very different skill set. There he is, the Peter Principle, Dr. Lawrence J. Peters. As many organizations promote their employees up to their level of incompetence. Many of you are thinking of people right now who were promoted to the level of being incompetent. We see it all the time. In fact, the University of UCLA actually had Dr. Peters present that. That was in their business management class of the Peter Principle. So when it comes down to the documented research, EQ always trumps IQ. But fully 85% of our success, folks, is going to be determined on how well you can communicate and get along with other people. And as I mentioned earlier about Napoleon Hill, you'll see him to the bottom left. He was the one that wrote the book Think and Grow Rich. And his quote was, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. He was hired by Andrew Carnegie. Now, everyone would think Andrew Carnegie, he was a Scotchman, a Scotty, if we want to call it. He came over with just a few dollars in his pocket and made an empire with the United States steel industry. And was probably in his day the wealthiest man on the planet. There might have been a couple from Europe that had him beat, but he was, you know, very well known for his wealth. But this was, if you noticed at the very top, the blue arrow that points to this quote, and this was placed on his tombstone, and he wanted to make sure that that was on there. Here lies a man who knew how to enlist the service of better men than himself. So who'd he hire? The guy to the far right, Charles M. Schwab. And you've probably heard the name before of Charles Schwab, the investment broker company of the Charles Schwab. Now, this gentleman was excellent in his communication and emotional intelligence. And as you see his quote below, I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people to be my greatest gift, and I'm hearty in my appreciation and lavish in my praise. So he never criticized anyone. I mean, he made it a point not to be critical, because we know how that affects someone if you criticize them. So he was excellent. In fact, during the time, if you made like 50 some dollars a week during the day of Andrew Carnegie, you were considered pretty affluent. He was paying him over $1 million a year. Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. The myth is everybody suffered. That was the Great Depression. There were more millionaires produced right after the Depression than any time in American history. So people were getting rich, but we, to include myself and my generation, thought, oh man, everybody suffered during the Depression. That's not true. So anytime there's a crisis, I guarantee you there's hidden opportunities there. Alec Bourne said that it's possible to store the mind with 1 million facts and still be entirely uneducated. Now, I want to emphasize again, folks, I'm not bashing education. Albert Einstein said education is what remains after one has forgotten everything he learned in school. Mark Twain said education consists mainly of what we've unlearned. Now, this is a good quote. If you've ever heard the name Jim Rohn, of course, he's passed away since, but he was an excellent communicator, great speaker. But this quote of his really tells all, that formal education will earn you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. So the way I interpret that is this: when you find your passion, and then you develop whatever education you need that's going to enhance that passion and educate that passion toward a purpose, that's when you're going to find true success. So we know, based on Peter Drucker, who was considered back in the 80s the father of modern management, he said that 66% of the workforce are working in jobs they really don't want to be in. It's because it's like that little ditty used to go, I ho, off, but this one's I owe, so it's off to work I go. So they're just working to get a paycheck, to provide for their family. I mean, that's admirable, but if you're working in something that you cannot stand, how effective are you? How's it going to affect your health? There's a lot of research that deals with that as far as the productivity in the workforce of people being either, one, happy, their status in the organization, because a lot of people think it's very stressful to be the executive. But the research shows that the longevity factor weighs more to the executive than it does those who have less responsibility because of status. Status has a lot to do with it. People need to feel that they're important, that what they do matters. George Bernard Shaw said that 2% of people think, 3% think they think, and 95% of people would rather die than think. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. Oftentimes we're taught what to think, but not how to think. Henry Ford said that thinking is the hardest work that there is. That's probably the reason so few engage in it. Einstein said, now this is really profound. Now think about what he said here. The significant problems that we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. So the problems that we have currently, whether it be in your organization, wherever it is, they're never going to be solved if you have the same type of thinking, the same people or the same culture continuing to think in certain ways. The thinking has to change. It has to be a paradigm shift in the way you think. And it's Socrates. I think he was back a few centuries ago. Yeah. But anyway, Socrates said the quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to the quality of questions he's willing to ask himself. That is also profound. What kind of questions do you ask yourself? That's self-talk. Are you asking empowering questions? Or are you asking questions that's going to sabotage your success? Now, I don't mean to sound like it's being elusive or I'm being vague or ambiguous, but I hope it kind of hits home as we close this up. Now, I don't know why I have mastery step number 2, but here's what I want you to get. Clearly defined who you are by identifying the root cause of your thinking. So the quality of your life can only be to the quality of thinking that you've brought to it. In other words, to change the meal, you got to change the recipe. And to change the fruits, you got to change the roots. So let's look at it like peeling the onion. You know, the slogan, change your thinking, change your life, it's really far too simplistic. Now, here's where the challenge lies. And I'm going to list this up here. Oftentimes, people are focused to the far left where you see results. Management does the same thing. What kind of results are we getting? Why are we getting these results? So there's too much emphasis placed on the results, but not why. Why are those results happening? So as we look at our brain, everything begins in thought. And then the thoughts, of course, generate our feelings. Or then we have emotions, which is really energy in motion. The energy that we give off based on the feelings that we have is going to start creating certain behaviors and actions. And that's what's ultimately going to determine the results. So you've got to peel the layers of the onion to determine why is it that I'm getting the results that I am. It all starts with how you think. So habits are the result of our beliefs. So if most of us have about an average of 160,000 thoughts a day. But the problem with it is that we typically have the same 160,000 thoughts. We don't change our thought process because of habit. It's the comfort zone. The experts in the field of psychology and psychiatry, they say that 72 to 93% of our day is spent in the unconscious. Things that you don't even think about is based on habit. You know, like you driving your car. And I know most of you have driven distance where you've driven and you have what they call highway hypnosis, where the unconscious or the subconscious takes over, and you'll drive 15, 20 miles and realize, oh my gosh, I don't even remember driving past so and so in this town and that town. That's because your unconscious or the subconscious just took over. And almost in between 72 and 93, we're walking around unconscious, like we're sleepwalking, because our unconscious mind is taking over. Like you tie your shoe in the morning, or you don't think about, did I put it on my left foot, right foot? It's just out of habit that we move and do things, and we react based on habit. So all true learning is going to take place in the unconscious because, and most of you probably, they're trainers, have seen this before about the 4 stages in our learning process. We start off with the unconscious incompetence, and I like to use like a baby as an illustration, and two shy. Let's see, I'm speaking, what do you call that, pig Latin? Shoe tying, rather. Unconscious incompetence. So when a baby's born, they don't know the skill of tying a shoe exists, nor can they perform it. So they're unconscious incompetent at the time. So they don't understand the skill, they don't even know they exist, and they can't perform it. Then when they get to about 2 or 3 years old, they see mommy and daddy do it, so they know the skill exists, but they still can't perform it psychosomatically. So they have conscious incompetence. They're consciously aware of it, but they can't perform it. Then they move to the level of conscious competence when they hit about age 5, I guess, 5, it just depends. I think there's some teenagers today that still can't tie a shoe because they never had shoes with shoestrings. But they get to the point where they have to think about it, age 5 or 6, and you can watch their body language, and they're either sticking their tongue out or whatever while they're tying left over right, or they're saying it out loud, but they have to think about it. And for those of us that have been around a while and have tied, you don't think about it. You just naturally do it without any conscious thought. So that's when you get to the level of unconscious competence. When it comes to training, how important is it to get people to the level of unconscious competence? We never reach that level. Some do because it's their passion and they get to the point where it's just natural. But you just take our defensive tactics, for example. No one practices and trains defensive tactics every day. Those who are passionate about that, they do. But we just basically try to get them to the level of conscious competence. Carl Jung, I don't know if you've heard of this gentleman before, the Swedish psychiatrist. He actually was a friend of Sigmund Freud, but he differed in many ways because he disagreed with, or did I say Henry Ford? What's that? What was the famous psychiatrist? Sigmund Freud, yeah. But they were friends. In fact, I saw there was a movie that had them. It just happened to flip through the channels, and it had Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud working together, and he was kind of under the tutelage of Sigmund Freud, but he vastly changed his opinion on. But he made the comment. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it faith. So basically, what he's saying is that we live walking around unconsciously, and until we can actually consciously control our life, we just become wandering generalities and go with the flow, or what did your mommy and your daddy did, or what a particular sect of people do. So we tend to follow in those footsteps, and we just unconsciously go through life as a wandering generality without thinking about being that meaningful specific. To step away from that to do what you're designed to do. So until you can go within your mind and think about you and what you bring to the table and what your gifts are, you're going to go without. I like that quote, and I can't tell you who said it, but until you go within, you will go without. So what can you do immediately to begin your to live your life with passion and purpose? Socrates, again, he said, know thyself. Each of us were designed for a purpose, and there's something that you have within you that is world class. I'm not going to give the illustration of the house, ship, and the plane, but we know that if you neglect a house, people don't live in it, it's going to deteriorate more. The same with a ship, it's going to collect more barnacles if it's not sailing the high seas. The engineers say that if a plane stays in the hangar, in other words, you've heard the expression, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And that's the same with your brain. And if you're not consciously thinking about improving yourself, constant, never ending improvement, then there's no in between. We're either climbing or we're sliding. You can never consistently produce positive outputs when you consistently receive negative inputs. So the emphasis I like to make there is if you're constantly around people who have of negative influence or just negative attitudes altogether, it does have an effect on you. In fact, they've done a lot of research in relationships between men and women, and one of the partners think, well, I'm real positive, I'm going to lift up their spirits, they're going to be a more motivated person. More often than not, it's the negative person that knocks down the positive person to a different level that makes them less than effective. James Allen, and by the way, he wrote a very excellent book called As a Man Thinketh, and he's got one, or they have one out in print now, As a Woman Thinketh. It's so, but you know, the same principles are illustrated in it. But he said our minds is very much like a flower garden. So if you take a garden, you plant the seeds in it and you just walk away from it, we know that eventually the weeds are going to grow. So if you're not cultivating your brain on a regular basis and not feeding it good, rich mental protein, then weeds will naturally get in there, just naturally. Stinking thinking is what Zig Ziglar called it. Stay away from the news, folks. I mean, I can't emphasize that. It's attractive to get into the news and watch politics or whatever's going on in the news, but the negativity in the news, it for whatever reason, we're drawn to see who's worse off than we are or whatever the case might be. Here's my philosophy on that. If the news is bad enough that's going to affect your life or affect the world, you're going to hear about it. Somebody's going to tell you. So try to stay away from it as much as possible. Maybe hit the headline and see if it's something that may affect your life. But other than that, don't get inundated with bad news. And the reason I put beware of the five, here's what I want to emphasize to you folks. You are the average of the five people that you spend the most time with. You become the average. So you have to be very careful of your associates, extremely careful of who you hang out with, because that will have an effect on your success. And here's another thing that I thought to say to you is that if you find that you're the smartest person in the group, find another group, because you're not going to grow from it. They're just going to feed off of you. Focus on your potential, not your performance. That's where a lot of people, they kind of go through life like looking through the rearview mirror. So most think in reverse, and it's like I said, looking through the rearview mirror while trying to drive. Your past doesn't equal your present, and it definitely has nothing to do with your future. We don't look at our failures. You look at them as lessons. That's it. To change the course and direction. If a plane takes off from, let's say, New York City and it flies to Los Angeles, it's off course probably 95% of the time. But the pilot just emotionally or unemotionally makes the little adjustments and gets it back on track. So when we take off, we start setting goals. We have meaning and purpose. We're moving in a direction that we know we need to go in. You're going to slip. You're going to fall. But it's getting back on track. It's the important thing. But all the great thinkers said that our potential is unlimited. Here's some other awesome steps. Embrace the concepts of the America's greatest philosopher of the 1970s. Now, most of you remember Rocky Balboa. And the reason I emphasize Rocky is I remember that one scene in Rocky 1 where he's walking with that 15-year-old girl and he's giving her advice and he was saying, hey, you hang out with stupid people, you're going to be stupid. You hang out with smart people, you're going to be smart. That was profound wisdom, and that's true. You're going to become part of what you're around. So feed your mind daily with rich mental protein during the first hour of the day. Henry Ward Beecher, famous author years ago, he called it the rudder of the day. What you feed your mind first thing in the morning is going to have a drastic impact on your effectiveness for that day. Here's the thing that you only have total control of are the thoughts you think. You really can't control, but people are happy to the degree to which they feel they've got control. That's why they stay in a comfort zone. We see people who are in a comfort zone that you look at and say, wow, why are you so miserable? Or they might be in a relationship with an abusive partner, but they continue that pattern because it is the known. It is more fearful to step out to the unknown than it is to stay in the known. And it's really a phenomenon when you look at it. But you do have total control of the thoughts you think. That's it. And here's some illustrations. There was in America, this guy wrote a book called The Culture of Complaint by Robert Hughes. We are very good whiners and complainers. And you realize that when you visit other countries. And I've had the opportunity to be in 8 different countries, and I really hear all the negativity and the whining and complaining when I come back to the United States. Personally, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I think we are a very spoiled nation. Whine, moan, and complain. But here's the advice that I want to give. And as we wrap this up, stay away from toxic people and toxic media. Shad Helmstedter's book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. It's actually clear instructions on how to talk to yourself. Folks, it's okay to talk to yourself. It's okay to even answer yourself. But when you start to say, huh, then you might have a problem. So, but never, and I love this quote, never say anything about yourself that you don't want to be true, because you're giving your subconscious mental instructions, because it acts like a dumb computer. Whatever you feed it, it's going to accept it and move you in that direction. So don't badmouth yourself. You got to speak. I mean, I used to call it lie with integrity. So, if you're having a challenge somewhere, and instead of saying on the negative side, say, I am this. What are the I'ms in your life? Even though it might not be true at the time, all you're doing is telling the truth in advance. You're training your subconscious to move the psycho success mechanism in you. By the way, a man by the name of Maxwell Maltz liked psycho-cybernetics. And cybernetics, really, all that is came from the Greek word, which deals with the helmsman of a ship, steering it to the shore. So you're steering your mind to create the behavior that you want. The illustration to the right, Dr. David Fink at the Veterans Administration, he was a psychiatrist, and he wrote an article to Coronet magazine entitled Release from Nervous Tension. He said that out of a 10,000 patient case study, he realized that all 10,000 were habitual fault finders, constant critics of things and circumstances. And his conclusions were that the habit of fault finding is the prelude or mark of the mentally unbalanced. I'd like you to try this and see what happens. This is an exercise after we get off of this. You can pick a day that you're going to do it. Go 24 hours without complaining about anything. Most of you will not make it till 3 p.m. Eastern time without complaining about something. Maybe you're going to complain about Randy Perdue and that West Virginia accent. Whatever, you're going to find something to complain about. Of course, James Allen, he said, until thoughts is linked with purpose, there can be no intelligent action. So what is your purpose? What would excite you and get you out of bed an hour early to live your passions and purpose? There was a study conducted by 50 people, but this was Anthony Capello, that were 95 years of age. So 50 people at 95 years. This is, he gave them a series of questions. But here is the things that stood out the most. When he spoke to them, he said, if you had your life to do all over again, what would you do differently? And they said, well, reflect more, risk more, And then the last one, they would do more things that at the end of their day would have an effect on others after they're gone, a lasting effect. So these were people that were 95 years old. So do you reflect? Do you take risks? Do you do more things that you know is going to have a lasting effect on others in a positive way? Harold Kushner wrote, he said, our souls are not hungry for fame, comfort, wealth, or power. Those rewards create almost as many problems as they solve. Our souls are hungry for meaning, for the sense that we've figured out how to live so that our lives matter, so that the world will be at least be a little different from us having passed through it. When we start setting goals, this is what I want to get to because we got to close this up. As you look down at the bottom, here's the big emphasis on goal setting. I know many organizations will do a strategic plan, but if you do not have some type of reward mechanism where you celebrate those benchmarks or the objectives going toward it, it's not going to mean anything. But we have too many get goals, things that you want to get, and the do goals, like a to-do list. I want to do this, 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 without the be goals. In other words, you're going to have to be before you do. So you look at people that have become successful, you can use role models, and what is it that they do differently than me? So you have to become that before you can get the things that you want that are similar to what that person has. We know that based on research, there's only about 3% of people who clearly write out their goals. A lot of research has been done on that. What can I do, or say, who can I count on to give me honest feedback? You got to be careful, folks, of who you can count on because they don't want to get out of their comfort zone. So who do you spend the most time with and why? And how do I talk to myself? These are questions you need to ask. And what are the causes of the results that I'm currently getting in finances, health, relationships, and what can I do about it? Blaise Pascal, 1623 to 1622. He was actually a mathematician, inventor, writer, and Catholic theologian later on in life. But he says, all humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room. So you've got to take that quiet time to go within. That mental foxhole, as Harry Truman said. Pythagoras, way back, said, learn to be silent. Let your quiet mind listen and absorb. So it's a habit that you have to create to try to get at least 15 to 30 minutes a day to sit in complete solitude. When you write out problems, write out goals, just sit and think and just let your mind absorb different ideas. At the end of your days, here's the thing, folks, I want you to get. At the end of your life, people are going to sum up your life in one sentence. Begin writing that sentence now. Success is not a matter of spontaneous combustion. You must set yourself on fire. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. Mark Twain said that. And then the reason I put this, I happened to fly over that. I was in Kauai, and the helicopter pilot said that's where they filmed the Fantasy Island when it would first come on. You know, you had tattooed, they would go, the plane, the plane. Well, I was flying over this little scene here, and I started taking pictures of it. And Fantasy Island is where most people are. They're on a, they don't put no effort into it. I have a little poem that goes along with it, but I'm not going to share that with you. Some of you that have heard me before have probably mentioned this. It's called that Someday I'll, Where Problems End, Where Every Piece of Mail's From a Friend. In other words, do it now, as W. Clement Stone used to say. Do it now. Start moving in that direction. but you can't move, and you'll never be able to rise above your self-esteem. So you got to develop that first. You got to be before you can have. Folks, I appreciate this time. And here, if you would, write this down, and I will send you, everyone, you're getting something totally free. I'm going to send you an audio recording. I will send you this presentation. There's something very important that you did not get in this presentation. And I bet if you think about it as a trainer, you're going to think, oh, he left this out. Tell me in your email what I left out. But I also want to give you the references from the materials that I have so you can do your own research. You just don't rely on Randy Purdue, and start discovering the real you, so you won't be living in a fantasy island. So my email is just Randy, R-A-N-D-Y, at randypurdue.com. That's my personal email, Randy at randypurdue.com. If you get on my email list, I'll send you little audio recordings and maybe even some vignettes on things that'll keep you motivated. But thank you for your time. And do we have any questions, Mike? Anything popped up?
No questions popped up. I'll be sending out an evaluation by email to everybody along with a certificate of participation. And our next webinar is in December, and we'll be sending out information about that in the near future.
Great. Well, thank you all. It was a pleasure being with you today. And I hope you contact me. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.